For this month's Taboo, I sat down with multi-platinum artist M.I.A, known by her stage name M.I.A. Now, you may know her from smash hits like Paper Planes or Bad Girls. She's never been one to shy away from speaking her mind, but she's recently come under fire for her statements on vaccines, big pharma, government shutdowns, and several other hot-button issues that one is not allowed to challenge under the current status quo. So I spoke with her about her experiences growing up as the daughter of a revolutionary father in Sri Lanka and later a refugee in London. Coming from humble beginnings to becoming a global sensation, one thing has always remained consistent for M.I.A. She expresses what she feels is right, regardless of how it affects her career or image. All right, guys, so the mainstream media says it, so it must be true. And the mainstream media says that the person across from me is an anti-vaxxer, a terrorist sympathizer, an out-of-touch elitist who is suffering from terminal foot-in-mouth syndrome. I guess case closed, except I'm quite interested in this. I tend to be a little interested in people that the mainstream media doesn't want you to listen to. And what better way to find out if all of these things are true, they could be, than to ask her herself. I'm so excited to have on this episode of Taboo, M.I.A. Welcome.
Hello.
You know, what's really taboo are just having a willingness to have the conversation when right now the mainstream media thinks they have had the conversation for you. They've branded somebody, something, and you should accept it. And they try to prevent people who stand up to that, whether that's me or whether that's you, from ever coming together. And you caught a little heat when I tweeted you and said, hey, I'd love to have a conversation.
Yes, I think debate and conversations are, a threatened species, and that we have to expand the idea, and the need for debate and conversations, even if people disagree or agree, And I'm here to have a conversation with you. There might be things we agree on and things we don't agree on, but that doesn't mean that I have to completely shut you out of my life, or you completely deny my voice. And I think that's what it's about. Like, this should be an inspiring thing for people, that two women, and women of color can sit down and have a debate and work out our, similarities and differences, and it's not a threat and no one's going to die,
I think it is a threat, perhaps, to an institution which believes that education can only come from the New York Times. Like, there's a protected class of people that are educated enough to have the conversations for us, and that those are the people that we should rely upon for our ideas. And despite the fact that I'm sure you and I have plenty of differences, I think we agree on the perspective that no, education actually comes from going out there and challenging some of the ideas that you may have.
Before I get into it, I just do want to say that I surrender my words to God. And, I'm not really here to start a fight, but I want to speak the truth, my experiences. And I have to stick to that no matter what it is, And I think that is a principle I've always stuck to from the day I came out the gate, And before, people in the underground embraced me for speaking the truth. And then today I've been given a medal, by the British Empire and the monarchy for my lyrics, not because I'm this huge pop star that avoided speaking, but literally I'm a musician who spoke out. And so it's very schizophrenic, the mainstream media, because on the one hand, you get given medals for speaking out. On the other hand, you're punished for speaking out. So I've lived through the experience, So I think for me, yes, it's about sharing those observations, and it just is I think, a valid thing. If it's a personal experience and it's something you've observed and something you've experienced, no one can take that away from you.
So let's start my audiences with that, because they may be like me and they don't follow culture enough and they don't know your background. Speaking of your experiences, you have been branded a terrorist sympathizer for speaking out on your actual childhood experiences growing up in Sri Lanka. Can you just sort of update us on what those experiences were before we get to you speaking about them?
I have my father's book here, but in the 70s, there was a civil war that broke out in Sri Lanka, where I come from. And so my dad was one of the founding members of an armed resistance revolution against the government, who were oppressive to the Tamil people. So the percentage of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka is like Black people in America, you know, and they had sort of decided to go through the armed struggle, and it lasted 35 years, and it came to an end in 2009 when I was at the Grammys. And so, being the only Tamil voice in the Western media at the time, and being awarded, you know, being nominated for an Oscar and a Grammy and all of these things, the same year, in the same month the conflict was coming to an end, I used my platform to speak out about it. And even though my dad was not involved in the resistance at the time, he was a mediator between the two. I chose to speak out, you know, because there was war crimes being committed.
When you say a war crime, what do you mean?
Well, the Sri Lankan government in 2009 had sort of evacuated all foreign media and all foreign politicians or mediators and all of these people, and silenced them. They actually blew up the head office of the BBC there, and you know, threatened everybody. So everyone left, and so there was this blanket blackout of information. And then they forced 400,000 people onto a strip of beach and bombed them all, you know.
400,000 of their own citizens.
400,000 Tamils were pushed onto a strip of beach that was 1.5 miles long, and then they were bombed in a no-fire zone. And so at the time, this was considered a war crime. And from 2009 to today, which is 2022, we've had to grovel at the UN as a victim, going, you know, they're torturing us in the prisons, they're raping these people, that we're still in refugee camps, you know, it's been 13 years. Like, and nothing has been done. No one's been tried, convicted, you know, held accountable. And then my uncle, he was like 80 years old. He was the biggest bishop in Sri Lanka on, you know, both sides. And he was a Catholic priest, and he dedicated 10 years of his life, and he passed away last year, to actually counting every single person who'd been killed in the last days of the war coming to an end. So it's May 2009. So everybody who died in that time on that strip of land, he recorded it. And it came to 149,000 people were killed, and the rest were taken as political prisoners and kept in camps.
This bombing took place in 2009.
Yes.
In the modern world. You're not talking about a story from, I mean, you're saying that in 2009, 190,000 people, 400,000 people were bombed.
149,000 people were killed in 2009 on that strip of land. But the Western media and the mainstream media always had to repeat the same narrative. So this is where my interest in fake news, really, it's not really my interest. It's just I had no choice but to learn it. So in 2009, I came across the concept of fake news because everyone was repeating the soundbite, which is 40,000 people, 40,000 people, 40,000 people. And it was like, that's impossible, because yesterday you reported 20 and the week before there was 10. And then, you know, even if you use common sense to add up the math, it's over 40,000 people, but they kept repeating it. So, you know, I was really interested in why they take a soundbite and just zoom it out to the world and repeat that narrative and beat you over the head with it until you get so brainwashed and you surrender to that idea, you know. And that's when you start picking things apart, you know. And I kind of fell out with the internet. I fell out with mainstream media. I fell out with wanting to even be a musician or, you know, a celebrity. Is just like, what's the point when you can't even talk about what you want? And so it's just interesting to fast forward 10 years, you know, and see the state of the world, because I feel like it happens on a larger scale now. It's not just affecting my direct lineage of the Tamil people, but it's like everywhere, you know.
The thing that's so stunning to me and why I keep asking you to, again, tell me these numbers and tell me what happened is that for any place for that many, even if you said it was 40,000, let's actually use the low number. If you told me 40,000 people perished anywhere, you would think that this would be wall-to-wall global coverage and people would all be outside boycotting and protesting all across the Western world. Especially, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I'm going, you could have one person die at the hands of police and launch a global movement. You're telling me that there was a beach and somewhere between 40,000, as if that's a small number, and 150,000 people perished, and the government was behind this and nobody cared?
Nobody cared. Not even Oprah. Nobody, of course nobody cared. Like I went on Bill Maher, like there's a documentary about it. It's called M.I.A. M.I.A. And so it talks about that, you know, the dilemma I was having as an artist, because artists, musicians didn't speak about politics, you know. But I felt that I had no choice because I'm a Tamil. It's like you don't have a choice. You don't have the luxury, you know. And woke wasn't cool at the time. And it wasn't marketable, or, you know, people were just like, no one's interested, it's not cool. And that was that, you know.
So you start speaking out about what's happening, and what was the feedback that you were getting? Were there managers and people saying,
people
like,
just didn't want to listen to it. They just kept saying, talk about, you know, what's it like to eat truffle fries in Beverly Hills right now? You know, it was like that because people just wanted to hear the story of rags to riches. They wanted me to be like, I came from a mud hut, look at me now. You know, I'm driving a Bentley and I'm so happy, I'm liberated. And that was the narrative Hollywood wanted me to say. But money didn't mean shit, you know, when 150,000 people are getting bombed and you can't speak about it. And if you have to compromise that to achieve this status, it just wasn't worth it, you know. In a larger scale, not just talking about myself and my experience, but on a larger scale, this level of censorship or gaslighting, I would say, it induces mental illness in people, which I think is why it's been going up in society, because it's so difficult, because on the one hand, 99% of the people would have shut up and took the Bentley route, you know, and become the billionaire, and would have found it quite easy to make that compromise, you know. But for me, obviously I have a very political dad, and my family come from that, you know. So it was just not an option not to talk about it, because it's ingrained in the DNA of my music.
So if you had simply forgotten who you were, you could have become someone else, was essentially the offer.
Well, that was what was on the table.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, social problems is bullshit, you know. You don't need to talk about social problems. And beyond the social realm, there's just like this floaty musician that bypasses all social problems. And you could just look good and, you know, sell capitalism on this like level that sells aspirations and affluence to the world, you know. And that in itself is a difficult situation. Like, this book is about that. It's about the role that refugees and immigrants play in being the middlemen who sell affluence back to a country that can't afford it, you know. And we are part of the system that is in place, which is the reason why loads of countries are broken around the world. You know, the reason why they can never achieve certain things is because they can never pay the debt off. You know, they're constantly indebted till the end of their life because they're born into debt. And the reason why they're born into debt is because of the system that's already in place, you know, and the structure. And this is kind of also what leads us into the modern day, is the concept of WEF or WHO and UN becoming these central governments that are going to save humanity. This is like a really important conversation to have. And I feel like I'm on this show to talk to you because a lot of your stuff is within the realm of America, you know, and being an artist, that's sort of like, I get the American thing and, you know, I'm there now. But at the same time, you know, you have this otherness, which also understands the politics of how the American left affects geopolitics and the perpetual kind of exploitative system that's in place, you know, which is really dressed in humanitarian, philanthropic, like really like nice, cozy words that's there to be like, this is great and we're going to save you and you're a victim. And, you know, these systems are set up from a long time ago. And I feel like now it's an interesting time in America where all of that is thrown up in the air and people are questioning it. And Americans within America are seeing it for the first time. Because that information for Americans didn't exist before the internet, where the media were very, very good at gatekeeping that information and really building this very safe haven bubble around Americans, that Americans weren't really exposed to a lot of stuff, right. You know? Like, you had to really go and seek this information out. And now I think that is kind of what happened. Yeah. The people who were sort of tricked the most by it are now the ones that fight the most.
Yeah.
You know?
Because I think what happens is that when you wake up to it like I did and you realize that your entire life has been a lie and it's been a lie at your expense, you get really angry. You know, you go through a period of, am I crazy? Then you kind of go through a period of, I'm really angry. And then it kind of brings forth this period of tremendous activism. And I think for a lot of people, maybe the mistake, the good mistake, if you will, I know that sounds a bit oxymoronic, that the American government made was that it was all good and well when they were telling lies about everybody else, right? It's like, this is the narrative that's happening overseas. This is the narrative that's happening overseas. The mistake they made is they started lying on the American people, right? So they were trying to convince us that we were terrorists, right? And then you start to think,
what's really
wait a
funny
minute.
Because, yeah, now the table's turned.
The guns are now on the American people.
Yes, and I never thought that would happen.
Yeah, they're just calling us all terrorists. They're calling us all, I am being called a white supremacist by the media. I mean, it's unfathomable. What are you talking about? How can you just say that? How can you, in good conscience, write that a Black woman is trying to further a society where she can't exist in? It's implausibly stupid. And then what happens naturally is you go, okay, if they're saying that about me, it doesn't take too much of a stretch to believe that everyone else that we've been told is this or is that.
Well, I was called the same, but I was called anti-Black. And that was really another like weird thing because, you know, my work from day one has been to include the other voices outside of America, but that could be anywhere. It could be Africa, it could be India, it could be, Asia, where there's 30 million slaves today, And I thought that was really, that narrative was planned, and it was a major sort of planned hit on my, what I stand for, basically, and what my work is. Like, you just have to listen to my work to know that that's just not true.
That's the gaslighting, though, that you're talking about.
That was the gaslighting. And then they got a lot of Asian people, funny enough, that everybody they employed to do the hit job on me was brown. So they went out and got loads of Indian girls to write all these hit pieces on me saying how I was anti-Black, and they was somehow on a better, righteous ground for judging me and calling me a racist, and they all went in, because everybody pushes a falling fence, as the saying goes, and they were all like, oh, M.I.A is this terrible person, and even though she's my kind, I'm happy to denounce her because I support BLM, and she's terrible. And it's like, what did I actually say? That makes me racist. I said, oh, people should hashtag Syrian Life Matters. Mm-hmm. And that was seen as
assault.
The most racist thing that you can say. And I had no idea, because I was living in England at the time, going through my own thing, And I had no idea what was happening in America. But that was the whole point, Stuff happens in America, and in my head, it's like, that stuff is in America, and then there's the rest of the world, And so sometimes I say things from the perspective of, thinking about the rest of the world or being an outsider. But your voice has to always go through the funnel of American media, and then get projected out, because they own the platform, they own the social media, they own not just the tech is not just the tool, but it's also the marketplace. It's also the structure. So it's not just about content creation and culture and things like that, but you're fundamentally like owning how people evolve on the planet right now. The infrastructure, what the lens is on, is also American.
Yeah.
The marketplace, the economic structure, like all of this.
The entire ecosystem.
Entire thing. If you look at it, like if you take somebody like Bill Gates, or you take somebody like Apple, it's not just the tool. It's not just the platform, or it's not who owns Twitter, it's who owns the phone, but also how we all communicate on the phone. And that's the only way we communicate now, how we pay for things or how we exist. And everything is, they own the entire ecosystem of a human being and the human mind and the human existence. And I think that was like an interesting thing at the time, because that's what I was trying to point out.
You said, yeah, Syrian lives matter. And then they sort of said, how dare you say this?
And then everyone slapped me on the wrist to be like, you need to learn about this. And then I was like, well, I don't live there, so I don't actually have to learn about that. But then they were like, you do have to learn about that. And that was that. And meanwhile, the war in Syria is no longer fashionable right now. It's like we're on to Ukraine. But it hasn't ended. It's still a valid conversation to have now, but it's just not. And so we've moved on. Since then we had Trump, therefore we've got different problems. And now it's about Russians. And you know what I mean?
Like, no, it's true. It's like what it is Black Lives Matter. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. It was a psychosis decided upon by the mainstream media narrative. There wasn't a single statistic or data point that could back up the fact that
nobody wanted to have this conversation. That was my point. It's like,
but like the Sri Lankan thing is more important. It's a real thing, right? And then we say, if you do not get on board with the fake thing, and how dare you bring up a real thing when we have decided already on the fake thing, and we have the entire ecosystem, the mainstream media, we own the celebrities, we own the phones, we own the apps, we've got Apple, we've got Google. How dare you think you have the audacity to stand up to the button that we just pressed? And that's what you did.
Yeah, because the way I saw it is that I was very confused by living in England in 2015, and all I'd seen the 5 years from the minute I left America after the Sri Lankan war ended and I couldn't talk about it. I was like, okay, I'm leaving, you know. And from this perspective, the way I saw it is that Obama and Hillary Clinton had started the Arab Spring, and this entire campaign was going on in the Middle East. And then we had all of this other stuff and problems, and ISIS was popping up in, you know, Iraq or whatever. And, you know, and they were sort of threatening our comfortable lives in the West as well. And all of these conversations were going on your mainstream media. You know, this is just the news I was getting at the time. And that's where my head was at when I said, oh, an American musician who's huge, like their platform is huge because they toe the line, which is what we were already talking about. When you toe the line, you get to be a billionaire. And I said, when you're towing the line, you can't say hashtag Syrian Life Matters. 100%. You just cannot. And that's why I was cancelled. So then, if you know that I was at the Super Bowl and I gave the middle finger at the Super Bowl and I was sued for $16 million. So I have the right to talk about the Super Bowl because I was affected by the Super Bowl. In my personal life and experience, I'm coming from a personal place, you know. So I was like, yeah, I went on the Super Bowl and I gave a middle finger and I got sued 16 million, you know. And they said, what do you think of Beyonce putting up the black fist, supporting Black Panthers at the Super Bowl? And it was a hit job and I didn't know, but the journalist asked me and I said, well, she can do that as a Black woman, but maybe she won't be able to say Syrian Life Matters, you know?
Pointing out the hypocrisy and the irony.
So I was just saying, yes, that's fine. It's fine because you could be a Black woman in mainstream music and you can say, I am Black, which is fine. But I was like, she also supported openly the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Obama campaign. She would not be able to talk about the war in Syria. But then the counterattack that I got and the way they cancelled me was to say, Black people are Muslims too. So how dare you say that? But that just didn't make sense.
It never makes any sense.
So
it never makes any sense.
I was like, but I know that Black people could be Muslims. That's not the point I was making. I was specifically making a point about if you are a mainstream artist who politically funds the campaign of this candidate who's then engaged in a war over here, would they speak out about it? No.
What you're saying makes perfect sense. And it's interesting that you start this by saying, I probably shouldn't even go there. I just want to say what you're saying makes perfect sense. It's just like what you're saying makes sense because you probably sometimes question your own sanity because sometimes I say something and I'm like, did I just say what I said? Because the headlines are now, have I said something else that I have to go back and listen to what I said? And that is the power of the gaslighting machine, is that they start to make you, I don't know if I should even say anything at all, because no matter what, you lose by even opening your mouth.
Saying you're not Black, so you can't speak on it, you know, is another thing that has happened since then in a wider, you know, it's been that argument of you're not this, so you can't talk about it. You know, like if you leave race out of it, you're not a woman, so you can't talk about it. You're not a man, you can't talk about it. You know, like that sort of easy to kind of shut down the thing is affected culture in how artists work. You know, like I see the newer generation suffering with this point. You know, a lot of the people that I work with or come across, they always say, oh, but I'm a white male, so I can't touch this subject. You know, they say, well, I'm a Chinese person, so I have to do this, and I'm a da-da-da. And that sort of box building, you know, is really interesting to me.
Just giving people power, and it's crap, because what's interesting is I'm a Black woman, and
so you're
I
a
was
Black
not
woman, which is
allowed
why
to say.
Why I wanted to bring it up, to be like, you know, having been on this side where it's very confusing. Like, also, my dad's book, when he talks about monetary exploitation, he's not talking about monetary exploitation of Indian people specifically. It's like, no. Globalization and the globalist system is everyone, you know, includes everyone. So when you're past a certain point and you see the picture, you cannot define things by race. If one people are oppressed in one place and another person's oppressed in the other place, it's still oppression. And you get to see it like that, you know? And if you identify the oppressor, which is what the whole BLM thing is, you know, we're discussing oppression. And there's valuable conversations to be had between somebody like me and how the Tamil people who were engaged in an armed struggle, you know, and this was my response, is to say if you fast forward some time, where do you go with this? It would be a Black revolution in America. You know, the fast forward, the thinking of this racial conversation, you know, or it's, you know, in America, it's not a territorial thing and it's not an ethnicity thing, but it is a racial thing. But if you get to the extreme end of this conversation, it's a revolution, it's a struggle, you know, it could be an armed struggle. And my dad already thought that and went there in the 70s and set one up and had the army, you know. And then within the Tamils, we had 4 fractions. So we had 4 different leaders with their 4 different groups, and then they were interfighting. So you can have a Candace Owen, you know, the leader of Black conservatives, or you can have the leader of BLM, whoever the leader is, or Beyonce, the leader of Black people. And they both say, okay, we need armed resistance, and that's what it's about. Then I can tell you how it ends. You know, it was a debate that was worth having, but nobody wanted the debate. This cancel culture thing where they made me out to be the racist person was not, I felt, you know, I was like, who's at the bottom of it? You know, there's so many different people this could be. So that made me look into it even more, you know, and I was like, well, you have this elite class, you know, you have Black elites, and then you have poor Black people in America who are controlled by the same mass media narrative as everybody else, white people and the Hispanics. And, you know, they're all in it together. Like right now, it's confusing because the vice president is Tamil. You know, she's Tamil and Black. So that's another thing. But we're not allowed to talk to each other because I'm a Tamil and you're Black. And you have to be in your experience and your narratives, and I have to be in my experience and my narrative, but we cannot have conversations.
It's divisions. They create all these victim structures, and they keep the victims warring at each other, and then they keep the people, you know, in for example, Black America, obviously just a tool. Nobody cares about racism in America. They made it a thing again because it gave them power. And what it basically said, we're 13% of the population. That's it. 13% of the population is Black America. And so what it allowed them to do was to censor and shut down the rest of the population from speaking. It gave them actually the ultimate power, right? Unless you are Black, you can't speak, right? And then you come to find out they don't really care about Black people speaking because at the same time I had to shut up, right? So it's like, oh wait, sorry, it's not unless you're Black. It's unless you are Black, you can speak if you're Black, but you have to speak and say this exact same thing, which is basically a script that's being handed to you by the mainstream media. And the people that are controlling that script are not
but while this happened, what happened is we got COVID. So
new
while
script.
a new script.
A new script came out.
So while everybody's like, okay, I've got my place and you got your place and da-da-da-da-da, and nobody's talking, and then boom came the new script, which then reapplies to everybody,
It's literally a script that comes out, and it's literally like there was somebody sitting above the planet and they just hand a script down and it echoes. Everyone says the same thing.
Yeah, so then what people find out is actually poor Black people and poor white people and poor everybody else, they're all poor. And they're all the same. And they're going through the same thing. And it's, the system's rigged to basically generate a handful of super rich people at the top. And again, going back to 5 years ago, is I only know the narrative from the outside, which is that Obama, who was the Black president, bombed and killed, Colonel Gaddafi, who was the head of Libya at the time, that was standing up to the dollar, and he got killed. And then now Libya in a state of...
It's a disaster.
It's a disaster.
Okay, so it's very similar that when, the state of Black America right now is a disaster. There's nothing left. It's every inner city community has 60% in, crime rates. There are places where police won't go. Police officers resigned, right? And obviously what that does is that it rises up criminals in its place. When there's no order, there's just criminality. And I always knew it was going to lead to more Black death, and there is more Black death because of Black Lives Matter. And on top of that, all the money went to a bunch of transgendered organizations. So it was sort of this great hoodwinking of the mainstream media, and it robbed Black Americans, in my opinion, of our future, because that money should have gone into education, which to me is the only way you can really free yourself, is to be educated. Where are the schools? Where are the scholarships for these children? I mean, sure, maybe there were a couple of people that were minted as spokespeople for Black Lives Matter, but I can't think of how it helped Black America in a single way. It was a narrative, And the truth is Black American children can't read. We're facing a serious education crisis. And when you can't read, it further allows the media to pollute your mind, and they tell you what to be upset about. And I really do believe that the only true freedom is unlocking your brain and seeing how things really are.
Yeah, it's about having a lot of positive role models as well. And you're obviously educated and intelligent, but you cannot fully be accepted because of your political views. But then at the same time, you have the Supreme Court Justice, who's also a role model to Black women, I guess, who...
I don't feel that way. And I think that believing that is part of the problem. Like, you shouldn't see someone as a role model because of the way they look, right? You should see them as a role model because of the things that they do. And I think we're further divided by this concept that if it looks like you, it's you, because that's what forces people to defend things they don't believe in.
Well,
you can't
that's
treat
what's
Beyonce as a Black woman, even if she says something horribly stupid, because she's Beyonce and she's Black and she looks like you. And that was sort of the critique of me when I started exploring Black Lives Matter. It was how, I see myself in George Floyd. It was this thing that people kept saying. And I sort of came out and I said, why would I see myself in George Floyd? We're both Black. Our comparisons end there.
Well,
he's a criminal. He's done this.
This is a totally interesting thing that I wanted to talk about is, again, talking about my own experience. So after the documentary came out and, it was very community driven, and it's showing Tamil people, here's a Tamil musician who made it with £100. You can do it as well from the hood. You don't need a big check or whatever to achieve your dream or go outside of the normal kind of restrictions you have as an immigrant or a refugee. And when that documentary came out, I was approached by loads of Tamil people, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to take time to... And also, this is post being cancelled by BLM for being anti-Black, that everyone's forced to go into their own community. You know, like white people have to go into white community, and, you know, you're Tamil, so you can only work within the Tamil realm and within the Tamil people. So I was like, I'm going to do that. So you're right. I don't have the right to talk about the Chinese people or, you know, the voiceless people in the Philippines, because they don't own the tech. Only Americans own the tech. How do Filipinos get to talk on the tech and tell them, oh, there's 100 million people in the Philippines, and like millions of them are modern day slaves that get paid less than $1 a day. You know, where do they get to go and say these stories except via the mouthpiece of the UN, you know? Apart from this victim narrative that the UN constantly puts out, they cannot have direct conversations about how that works, you know? And so I was like, I'm going to go back into the Tamil community. And meanwhile, Beyonce was making Ivy Park in Sri Lanka, paying people 60p an hour, you know?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so then you're like, I'm going to do some philanthropy and give money to the community, build some schools. And the Tamil people that approached me to do that ended up kind of scamming me, which were my own people, you know. So I have like a love-hate relationship with my own community, and I apply that to everybody.
Right.
I think white people are allowed to have the love-hate relationship with their own, because there's good and bad.
Well, I just think it's good and bad.
Within the Tamil community.
It doesn't even matter if it's in the Tamil community. And this is why I think it's not good to think that you can only speak to people in your own community. That actually empowers the institutions that we're talking about, right? It's mental segregation. I don't need to be a Tamil person to be able to speak on the issue if I'm educated on it, right? There's this wonderful little moment where
we need if there were people being killed in Sri Lanka and there were Tamils and they don't have access to phones, I would want you to.
Great, and that's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with that. But if someone said to me, well, you're not allowed to speak on that, right? What does that actually do? It restricts truth. I actually consider myself to be a voice for truth. I don't care what that looks
100%.
like. I don't care.
So
if I think Beyonce is not great, I'm going to say that. If I think she's great, I'm going to say that. And I'm not going to limit myself by saying, well, you're not Black, so you can't speak on that issue, because I know that's bullcrap. That's just meant to make us all only comfortable speaking about certain issues before they get to slap your hand down and say you can't talk about that issue. You should talk about it because there are facts, and facts don't matter whether or not you're a white person speaking them, if you're a Sri Lankan speaking them, or if you're a Black American speaking them. The facts are the facts, you know?
Well, I always felt like I've put my career on the line every step of the way for facts and truth. And you know, I made the Borders video before Beyonce put out Lemonade. And the vibe of that project and the meaning of it, I feel like is the only thing I ever had as an artist, is that I wasn't interested in making money, but I was interested in dealing with what was truthful to me, you know. And we shot that video with in South India, and I went to originally shoot it with refugees from Sri Lanka, from, you know, where all the Tamil refugees had gone and settled in the south of India. And we shot the video around there and tried to employ all the kids to be in it and stuff. And it was just a project that I had to go off and do for my own, you know, realization. And even though, and it got picked up in the news. So it's got 25 million views or something on YouTube, but really where people saw it when it came out was on the news. So everybody kind of talked about the importance of it, and people, you know, like Al Jazeera covered it and loads of news outlets covered it. And I think I wasn't going to make it in the mainstream media because I'd said stuff, you know, that was not part of the narrative. And also politically, I was not going to back what was happening in the world, you know, due to the Arab Spring and stuff like that. So I couldn't just be cool with that, you know, and I'd stuck up for WikiLeaks. So I got cancelled on that level, you know. So I had to reject the music industry and the mainstream and all of this sort of stuff. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go make this video and da-da-da. But then I didn't realize that this was a thing that was valuable and that was going to be made into a template, you know? Like, I didn't even think of that, you know? Like, and I just feel like this is also another thing. It's like some people were very, like, not, I don't want to say jealous or envious, but it was this sort of place that you were able to overcome certain things, you know, and I felt like, and people came for it, you know? And then you had all of this other woke culture for the next 5 years based on everybody being activists and everybody caring about everything, you know, yet nothing got done except for COVID. You know, what happened at the end of that is that every common person got robbed, you know, and had their freedom taken away, censored, deleted off the internet, you know, lost their jobs, forced to take whatever medications they didn't want to, like, everybody lost their rights, you know, and we were so busy upholding these sort of structures where we're like, well, you're not allowed to talk about that. You're not allowed to talk about that. And meanwhile, this other thing came along and just like squished everybody down, you know?
It's the same with Black Lives Matter. And I am very excited for you to see my documentary because it was the same thing. Everybody's rights got crushed. You were told you had to say this, you had to toe the line. There was all this division that was created. And then before we could even recognize that we had gotten hit there and know everyone just wanted you to forget about it and just kind of gave you a little bow on that, then they suddenly moved very quickly into COVID. And to me, I just went, this is repeat the same thing. It's a mass media propaganda. And people think that what they're perceiving is true. They don't even know what it is, but they're being told to shut up because people are going to die if you even question the narrative. God forbid you questioned the police brutality narrative.
Yeah, that's what I don't like about it, is that people
shut up or everyone's going to die. And the truth is that no one's going to die if I ask questions. What is going to happen is that the actual power structures that are behind all of this might get exposed. And that's the real reason.
But this is why I think it's a spiritual thing, because when the 150,000 people got killed on the beach and no one did anything and you weren't allowed to talk about it, you, instead of going mad, and also I'd just had a baby. So it was this extreme time where you birthed life, but then you also witnessed like 150,000 people being killed. And so you're like, how do you compute that without going mad? And nobody would even admit that there's that many people who've died, let alone whether it was right or wrong, you know? And so you're like, instead of going mad, I'm just going to believe in reincarnation, that, you know, I'm going to just embrace this Hindu philosophy that these people are going to live again somehow, you know, and that the cycle of life and death is an ongoing thing. And it's okay to come to terms with the universe functioning in some sort of manner where it's constantly doing this, you know. So there's always destruction and creation and destruction and creation. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get used to that thought and just let it go, because you also don't want to become the monster you're fighting, you know? So then that's when I found out what my name meant. So I just finished this concept of, or making this record called M.I.A, which was really about censorship and internet censorship, which, you know, which is how I think the narrative of Sri Lanka was able to be conducted in such a manner, is because the Sri Lankan government were very, very tech savvy, and they built some of the Silicon Valley tech, you know, internet infrastructure, which was the first time they implemented in creating this propaganda narrative. So even though Sri Lanka is a very small place and the situation there could be seen as quite small, actually they taught the world on how to do it, you know. And what happened there is now what we're seeing on a larger scale of how
control the flow of information.
Exactly, and who controls it. And also the person who bought, say, Facebook from a 30 million user platform to 2 billion, he was Sri Lankan, but he's Sinhalese Sri Lankan, and he then went to work for the Sri Lankan government, and then they had all this Facebook, WhatsApp hate crimes that happened, and there was a bombing of the church and all of the stuff. So the Sri Lankan president had a green card, but my mum was banned from entering the United States. So a minimum wage woman, you know, a pensioner who worked for the Queen sewing medals, was banned as a terrorist. And then the guy who perpetuated the war crime was given a green card. And they did that through controlling the propaganda.
They determine who the terrorists are.
Exactly. You know, and everyone's like, you know, sorry, M.I.A, sorry it worked out for you because you're really, really talented and you're a great musician and you should stick to music. And even the Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary came on TV on Travis Smiley and said, M.I.A should stick to music and not talk about politics. And American media went and interviewed Sri Lankan politicians about me on their shows.
Wow. Straight
after having me on. And they shut me down saying, you're a musician and you need to shut up. And Jimmy Iovine, who ran Interscope at the time, he would always say, I think he's at Apple now, but he'd always be like, it's such a shame, like, you're the thing. But Jimmy's who every rapper aspires to be.
Okay.
He was like the first, you know, Dr. Dre and Jimmy were like, we're going to be billionaires, you know? And I'd be like, but wait, you know, you can't sell out culture to achieve this thing because there has to be some sort of integrity, you know? But he was always like, you can't have social problems and you need to like not talk about politics so much. But actually he was good, you know? He was always like, of course you have to talk about politics. On a personal level, he's like, you can't have Bob Dylan or, you know, John Lennon and people like that if they're not talking about things that matter.
Right.
But the world didn't want to hear it, you know, and the media and all of these other people were just constantly against it. But anyway, so I just went off to India and discovered what my name meant, which is the goddess of music. But she's also speaks up for the untouchables and fights for freedom of speech. So then I brought it back to Jimmy and I was like, look, 5,000 years ago, there was a concept that's written where you can be a musician, talk about politics, and stick up for the underprivileged, and it's completely accepted. And it's an old concept. You know, it shouldn't be confusing to people now in the modern times because it's not even new. Like, I didn't even come up with it, you know? I'm not this awkward, like, what is this person mashing up weird things that don't belong together? It's like, this is such an old concept in India. And, you know, so then I was like happy in that sort of zone saying, it's okay if the music industry don't get me. I'm going to go and spend time in India and discover what this allows you to be, you know, which is vast. And the concept of a female or a musician is just bigger than what I thought it was. And the concept of success is bigger. And the concept of self-realization is like a massive feeling, you know. It's beyond fame or money, you know. After I made Borders, which has shots of me walking on water, and I had this T-shirt that said, Jesus sad, because on the way to the video shoot, I found a T-shirt and we had like an in-joke on the video where we constantly wore badly spelled T-shirts. And one of the ones I found is the one that said Jesus sad instead of Jesus said.
Jesus said.
The way and the truth. Right. So I was like, oh, I'm going to put that on. And really didn't think anything more than that, you know. And just straight after that video, and then the whole BLM thing happened and I got cancelled. Then I went to the Caribbean that Christmas and I had this vision. And then it just like turned my creative world upside down for about 5 years.
What was the vision? So you're in the Caribbean.
I was in the Caribbean on the edge of a cliff and it was just like 1,000-foot drop to the ocean. And I had to sort of go and stay in this shack almost. And the furniture was still like upside down and dusty and stuff like that, you know, but that was the only place there. So it was me and my cousin and her son. And I was like, okay, we'll take it. There was no internet or electricity, but I started getting text messages, and I know that my data wasn't on to get Wi-Fi, like on an edge of a cliff kind of thing. I was getting these messages and someone said, you're going to die, you know, and I was like, it was like a threat. And then suddenly I started feeling very ill and I believed it, you know, and then I just thought that's fine. Like, you know, I've lived the life that I wanted and understood things and was kind of happy with what I've learned, you know. And so I just surrendered and I was like, okay, that's fine. And if that was my time, that's fine. And just when I thought that, I had this vision. I had a vision of Jesus Christ. First of all, I want to say that my vision of Jesus was, he wasn't wimpy looking. Like, he didn't look like he was starving and had been hung on a cross for, you know, days. He looked really strong. And it was the strongest thing I've ever seen. And I was thinking, wow, I did not believe in Jesus or Christianity. And I don't believe that this person is going to save anyone. This person is not going to, it's a concept. You know, this figure is not going to save humanity, you know. You want God to be like this insane concept or grandeur illustration which no one can even perceive how to illustrate, you know. You cannot draw a man and say that's God and he's going to bring salvation. But then when I saw the vision, I was like, I totally believe it.
I know so many people that this has happened to. It's unbelievable. I mean, like, no faith on a Thursday, suddenly on fire for the Lord on a Friday because they had a vision. And they are committed to speaking out on it because you recognize that when you have something that compels you like that, you're required to share that.
So it was very, like, interesting for me to go through that, to be like,
I mean, God definitely gave you your platform.
Yeah,
there's no question about
even
that.
Even the Matangi thing is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Even Hinduism, I loved the philosophical nature of it and the epicness of ideas and concepts and the universe and, you know, the self-realization realization aspect where your body and mind is capable of transcending everything and you can travel to space before you build a rocket. You know, you don't need to build a rocket because you could just go there. And because if you connect to the universe and you connect to God, you can already achieve all of these things without having to destroy the planet and fuel a rocket to go up there, you know. And I loved that idea. You know, to me, Christianity felt like I would never be into it because it's way more simplified as a concept, you know, and doesn't make you think that your mind and your body and breath and all of these things can work together to achieve something. You know, it's very much about, there is, you know, God is a little bit of an authoritative figure. you know. And so, and I always have a problem with authority, you know. So I was like,
join the club.
That's definitely not my religion. So to me, it is kind of like shocking, but that's who I saw, you know. And it's very stereotypically like man in a white robe. And it really was. Also, I wasn't ready to embrace this concept during the time of the BLM discussion in my life, you know, because I was like, definitely not going to come out. But then what it taught me is that don't blanket hate all white people, you know, and don't blanket hate all Americans, and don't blanket hate. You just never know, you know, and that it is based on some sort of spiritual thing. And then when Trump won is when you sort of got to see the war between the left and the right, you know, and I was like, well, that's nothing to do with me because this is like an American problem. But I think the aftermath of that is when you got COVID and people were speaking out about it, it gets used, you know, to be like, oh, these people are like extreme Christian or extreme religious people, you know, and they're very small-minded and they're very ignorant and they should be vaxxed out of here, you know, kind of vibes.
And that they don't care, and it's...
Yeah, and also Black people can't be Christians, you know, is also another vibe where I think these are all sort of like, and also it's just after cancelling every country on the planet from speaking and taking the ability to speak completely over to the American grounds, you know, because every other country in the world is stopped from speaking. So when you hold the key to speaking, you know, which is within the United States, then you do have to watch Americans go at it. So after even like suppressing every other voice, and you're left with this one demographic, and then within the demographic, there's now demographics of who can speak and who can't. And this is like...
And thank God. Because now, like I said, it's the dawn of an awakening, right? Because now we're wondering, what? Wait a second. When the media told us
they're the last ones to the conversation.
We are.
They are the last ones to the table. And
we are. I'm admitting that. I was totally in the dark. I mean, I'm listening to you talk about Sri Lanka, and I'll tell you what my perspective was. Whatever the mainstream media said was true. Obviously, why would they ever lie? Why would I ever believe that they would lie? When you talk about this power that the Americans held to determine the narrative, believe that we were victims of that power too.
Yes.
Right? We were victims of that power too. And that's why I don't begrudge people that fell for the Black Lives Matter narrative or this or that, because it's so, the ecosystem you're talking about is so powerful. It can convince you. I could be staring across from you and someone could convince me because of the power of tech that you were wearing head to toe purple. And eventually I go, well, maybe she is wearing head to toe purple. You know, and so I do say thank God that they turned their guns, figurative guns, on the American people, because now it's allowing us to wake up. And it's a real challenge now when you say no one can speak but the uber powerful elite people in Hollywood who are reflecting the ideas of the uber powerful people like the United Nations and, you know, these globalists that sit at the top and determine what the narratives are and who's going to be able to have power and how they're going to steal from one and give to the other and what war we need to care about and lights off on Afghanistan and lights on in Ukraine. And, you know, we're only awake to this. I mean, the idea that we would even push against the Ukraine narrative, which I've done instantly, you know, it's not feasible if they hadn't started calling Americans terrorists. Regular people who just want to pay their bills and go to church on Sunday are being called domestic terrorists. Thank God.
Yeah, true. For me, my narrative is confusing because my dad was a Tamil and was into politics and was, you know, part of one of the founding members of the armed struggle, even though his movement was called Eros. He wasn't part of the Tamil Tigers but Eros was destroyed or kind of got eaten by the tigers kind of thing, you know, and they split into two fractions and half quit and half joined. And so there was all these complications that are just so detailed that you couldn't break that down on the mainstream news because you can't, you know, it was far too complex. And so you just had to reside to being called a terrorist sympathizer, you know, but you weren't able to say your side of the story. But when this happens now, I completely get, you know, I'm able to identify it and go, okay, like, this means that and that means that. And from personal experience, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I've gone through the same, and now I don't even blink. When someone gets called something, I don't even accept it. I actually go pursue the truth. I go assume that when the media is in lockstep telling me that somebody is a domestic terrorist or this or that it means I should probably go try to hear the person. It's my first instinct.
But also, it feels like that is the confusion people are living through. You know, it's the cause and effect of censoring information 15, 20 years ago. And we're even more censored now. So if information is censored now, and the type of information that's censored now and the people that are censored now, imagine the world in 15 years from now, you know.
And social media makes it it's another layer of the censorship when we talk about fact checkers. Like I could write online right now that I got the COVID vaccine and then immediately had a heart attack after, and I could be wiped off the internet. Because you're not, even if you had an actual experience and happened to you, you have people who were talking about their reactions to the vaccine that were being censored. And these people, fortunately, because their voice is breaking out, and you know, I have been very vocal. I know that you haven't been vocal that you are anti the vaccine. I have been vocal that I was actually anti the vaccine. I thought it was a great human experiment. It's unimaginable to me.
No, I got cancelled the first week.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've been cancelled so many times. I'm having fun.
So the first time I talked about it was the first week it came out back in like January, February 2020.
That's just crazy.
And then the second tweet I made about it was when you invited me on this show.
I want to read those tweets.
I was quiet for 3 years through this.
So in case people, I'll preface this by saying that at the exact same time, Alex Jones was trending on Twitter because he lost his defamation trial, and they had determined that he needed to pay $965 million for lies that he told regarding the Sandy Hook school shooting. At the same time that Alex Jones was trending, Pfizer was trending because it was determined that, obviously, they lied about whether or not, if you got the Pfizer shot, remember the initial push was you will be protected from the coronavirus. And now they're like, oh, you won't be protected at all. Anyways, that's trending. You have the audacity to tweet Alex Jones lying and Pfizer lying, both trending. One with penalty, the other without. If you have no critical thinking faculties, this is about as crazy as we should get before nuclear war wipes out the human race. And then you follow that up by saying, if Alex Jones pays for lying, shouldn't every celebrity pushing the vaccines pay too? It makes so much sense that you had to get in trouble for that. I mean, where are we drawing the line? He can't lie about the shooting, but people can lie and get people to shoot things into their body, believing that it's going to provide them protection. There are people that quite literally won settlements from Pfizer because they had a heart attack. A 15-year-old, I believe, it was an Asian country who actually won a lawsuit against Pfizer, completely healthy, had a heart attack, was fortunately revived. All of these lawsuits that are happening now, people that are getting shingles, the women that were lied to about, who were gaslit for months, who were saying they were having menstruation problems. I've covered that on my show. They were my friends that were saying they hadn't gotten a period or they couldn't stop bleeding. Then they quietly admitted that, oh, okay, it could happen, but we weren't going to tell you initially because we just wanted you to roll up your sleeve. And the people that got this did it because celebrities jumped on Instagram, and it was like the Black Square campaign, right? Where do you donate to? There's a black square. So now you've got to donate to BLM. None of it makes any sense, but oh well, this is why we have propaganda of celebrities doing a bizarre dystopian thing and showing themselves getting shots. This makes sense. And yet, despite that making perfect sense, you were slated to do a shoot with GQ, an upcoming photo shoot with GQ, and your publicist got this email?
Yeah.
Sadly, I have some bad news.
The first vaccine tweet, I lost Vogue. And then the second vaccine tweet, I lost the GQ Man of
I would
the
like
Year
a Vogue
award.
graveyard. Everybody canceled from Vogue, I think, should be my friend, because I'm finding that there seems to be
A thread.
Yeah, Vogue will cancel you if you tell the truth, sort of a thing. So first Vogue, and then this GQ thing, this email that went out to presumably your PR person says, hey, sadly, I have some bad news in regards to the GQ award and our upcoming photo shoot. M.I.A.'s current Twitter activity was brought to our attention, and due to its controversial nature, meaning the truth.
Well, the first time I got denied, met Anna Wintour, and the first time I was denied the cover for Vogue was the day after Obama won. And that week he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And I walked into the office and Anna Wintour was like, what do you think about that? And then I said, oh, he should give it back because he's only been in office for about a week. He hasn't done anything. Why does he get a Peace Prize? And so they pulled my cover in 2010. So I've always had this relationship with Vogue. And so I still kind of stick to that. I don't think he should have got the Nobel Peace Prize when he hadn't done anything. And I would say that if it was anybody
bombing
else.
Middle Eastern countries at a rate that had never been seen before, but peace.
What is peace?
What is peace?
So, yeah, I think that's kind of a double-edged thing, you know, to be judged on your cultural value of like being on the cover of.
If you are a propagandist, if you agree to be a propagandist, this is your award. We'll put you on a cover and we'll make you more famous. And all you have to do is sell your soul. So my question for you is, why didn't you sell yours? You could be Madonna. You could be a billionaire today. You could be sitting cushy somewhere in Los Angeles. And
I guess it's the same reason my dad didn't. You know, my dad could have done the same thing. And it's just, you just have to say what's true. It's just not in my genetic makeup to have success at all costs, you know. And also I view success differently. I don't view it in a monetary sense, you know. And it is true, like to make this conversation productive, like this is the idea of where we're at, you know, and the way that WEF and WHO and IMF and all of these structures, institutions now who are going to be governing the world, you know, globally, while people are fighting about who's more right, you know, and which ethnic group has the time now to have the microphone. Huge shifts have happened on the planet, you know. And I think even Vogue is irrelevant for that reason. You know, like we're talking about governments now, like not even magazines, not even newspapers, like New York Times, Vogue, like who cares when you've got leaders of nations that are willing to give up nations and willing to give up countries to join this bigger idea of oneness and togetherness, you know, and they're selling you the brand of togetherness, yet we're still fighting on the ground amongst each other about who gets the check and who gets the mic and who gets the accolade and who gets the cover and who gets the, you know, perfume ad. And it's like so far beyond that point, you know, and that is really, whether you like Trump or not, he also called stuff out, you know, and he was difficult to control. And that's really what the problem was, you know. And now we have a new prime minister in England that just came in today or yesterday. And the concept of globalization and togetherness and we are one, on the one hand, is sold. And then also, if you believe in God, you would also know that we are all one and together. And if you believe in God, all of those people can see past prejudices, you know. and value the human being and value the connection to God, whoever it is, you know, and also defend the innocent. And so it's very confusing that these are running parallel. I think there's an awakening where people are becoming more spiritual, but at the same time, this has adopted the same narrative.
Well,
you know?
one is the idea and not the actuality that's being sold, right?
Yeah, so
The World Economic Forum is pretending that
so
we're all one.
One of the things,
it's an oligarchy at the very top. It's masters and slaves.
Exactly, it's still
like
within the monetary
supervisor
system.
Getting down there and saying, we're all one to the slaves, right? That's how I view the World Economic Forum. We're all one, right? And we're not all one, obviously. These are the people that are pushing forth the climate change narrative as just one, but fly around private all day, right? We're all one means you're going to be the slaves and we're going to tell you why you're going to be happy and have nothing. And really, at the top, we're all one, my opinion.
Well, I think it's very, I'm going to get cancelled for this, but it's worth saying.
I've already been cancelled. I've already been cancelled.
It's worth saying, well, where there's a discussion around, say, the Bible about the meek shall inherit the earth, okay? And within America, you're like, who's the meekest that's going to inherit the earth? Is it the Black community or is it the Jewish community, you know? And that conversation between these two communities at one point has to be had because they both claim to be the meek that inherits the earth, you know? And in that sense, it's a valuable conversation to hear in the modern day on that note. And this is all I wanted to say, that's what maybe you're seeing played out with Kanye, you know, and him needing to get into this sticky zone. But I think that's what that is. And zoom out from it on a global level, you have, you know, you still have the structure. This is what I'm saying. It's like you don't have colonialism anymore or the slave trade anymore, but actually philanthropy or the concept of the UN and IMF, which is now bailing out Sri Lanka from their financial debt crisis and their collapse that's just happened, is, you know, and they're being punished for not borrowing more money, you know, from the IMF. So they would just still forever be indebted. And now they've lost all their money and like, and eventually.
It's a different kind of plundering.
It's different. So on a larger level, the infrastructure is still there, yeah? But now I feel like certain people can't enter the conversation and chat about the bigger thing because it's almost like they've been paid off, you know, to not talk about it. And so it's very confusing, but that is the conversation. Like, even though you're CANDECE from America and you have the struggle of this left and right thing, and it's also a trap, you know, because beyond that, outside is a larger conversation where it's all poor people or all disenfranchised, you know, underprivileged people from all over. And you're talking about the middle class. Like, you're not even talking about people that are getting paid $1 a day, you know, that even middle class people in Britain can't buy property. Our mortgage is going up ×2, you know, starting next month or something. And no one can afford to have families, no one can afford to have education and own stuff. And that's the motto of the reset, is own nothing and be happy, which is applied to everyone in the world. But if you look at people who are truly modern day slaves that have nothing, you know, that are living one meal a day, and you can define what that is, you know, but right now we can't even listen to their voice, you know, and even these people are forced into taking vaccinations, and suddenly they're part of this narrative as, you know, they're good and they're part of it and they're compliant, and nothing else about them needs to be discussed, you know. nothing needs to be discussed about 75% of the population of this planet that took the vaccine, apart from the fact that they took the vaccine. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to talk about anything else now because that's what it is. And even...
We can't get them food, but we can get them a vaccine.
Because we really care about them.
Really care about them.
We really want to save their life.
Mm-hmm. And the way to do that is via a vaccine, obviously, not by taking a look at the economic structures that currently exist.
Yeah, so if you were part of a structure for 50 years, since the ending of World War II is when these structures were put in place.
Yes.
They're like soft colonization.
Yeah, we called it the international liberalism, you know? Like,
yeah.
It's now our job to spread democracy into all of these other nations.
Yeah, and it's still, you know, and it's still the US at the helm of this thing. So before
and the UK,
the British, but before the main, like the colonial structure was headed by the British. But after World War II, America won that title and they became the helm of the ship, you know. But then combined with the UN, it was just way softer. And I think now all of these world leaders are like, you know, we're doing you a favor. This is great. Like, you know, we're all together. We're one. Like, you should comply because this is for the greater good of humanity. And if you don't get the picture of the larger vision of humanity, it's wrong. But since the last 3 years, so this is what's quite a struggle for me to grasp is the last 3 years, I'm like, that's true. We are all one. And I'm definitely down to be a player rather than be like this narcissistic leader of a thing. I would just be a partaker in whatever structure they're building and comply for the greater good of humanity, you know. That's cool. If I have to live within my means, if I have to not have a lot of money, if I have to like share this thing, if I have to do that thing, if I have to shut up at this moment, I'll do that if it's for a greater good. But then every step of the way, people are just like slapped with this decision-making processes that's happening that constantly leaves 10 people super wealthy, 10 companies like with, you know, sort of unaccounted for like power that is just so big like we've never seen, you know.
Because they're in lockstep. The people that are selling the concept of the greater good are in lockstep with the corporations, and that's why
everything is so connected.
Yeah,
that's
they're
how
just trying to make you think that you're doing the right thing by giving up your rights.
The person who owns health also owns the science and also owns the technology and also owns the story and then also owns philanthropy and then also owns, you know, the fashion magazines and then also owns, and then you're just like, that's just insanity we've never experienced on the planet before, that level of power, you know.
Yeah. And when you speak about it, they call you insane.
When
you start to realize the insanity, they say, oh, no, this isn't insane, you're insane. You know, and that's that gaslighting that is happening across the board to so many people who are waking up and realizing that there is something very evil happening in this world.
Yeah, but I honestly feel like the combination is so really, again, is dialogue. Is dialogue on conversations, communication, getting rid of like these barriers that they've built between us, getting rid of the boxes, you know, not everyone's a herdable sheep, you know, that we are just led by the basic value of human, you know, and their instinctive nature, like what they need, dignity. And if it's turning down all our wants, you know, this is another thing that everyone's like, oh, the world is going communist and we're having to compromise on luxury and all of these things. I mean, if that is something that they're talking about where they level out the economic drain on resource drain on the planet, so one place doesn't drain 70% of the world's energy, and that it has to be balanced. And if things are like based on the data they've been collecting for all of this time without telling people, and the reason why we gave up all our privacy so that these data can be collected, if they're using that scientific data for actually bringing in a fair world and a better world for everyone, then cool. But if you're using all of that data just to make one person super rich and super powerful, and then everyone's just going to lock you into these weird small mental prisons, and physical ones, then of course there has to be change. There has to be a revolution. There has to be something.
I hate to be a cynic, but the answer is definitively the latter. We're dealing with maniacs. There's no difference, in my estimation, between Justin Trudeau, between Joe Biden, between Emmanuel Macron, between Boris Johnson. I mean, when we're talking about this concept of globalizing, it's governments in the West that have gotten into lockstep and realized that they can surmount power, and that they can essentially modernize what a slavery plantation was. And they do it with such a Machiavellian scheme as to convince you that to not submit to it is a form of selfishness. To not submit to the fact that you're going to have rolling blackouts this winter, right? It's just the Green New Deal, the Greta Thunberg, that's the propaganda pitch. They're afraid about their future. We're all going to die. This is the idea to say that we must act now. So we're going to throw tomato soup at a Van Gogh to make you realize that it's not your government that's impoverishing you. What it really is you doing your part for the planet. I wish that wasn't so, but humans are humans. You know what I mean? And humans are fallible, and governments are...
Yes, this is my the oil situation, because...
Just stop oil, yeah?
Well, the tomato soup, I mean, that's mashed potato on a M.I.A.
Yeah.
It's like my two favorite things. Mashed up together.
I love it. We've got a buyer. It's M.I.A.
It's true.
My two favorite things.
It's true. I don't have the money to buy it, but, I can crowdsource it or something. But anyway, I was like, yeah, that's interesting that the youth are like, yeah, we're just going to galvanize this spirit and go and fight this new energy thing. But we can't go forward as humanity unless we go rewind 50 years. Nobody cares what's going to happen 30 years from now or 50 years from now.
Yeah, well, part of it, though, is the manufacturing of the lies behind the idea that we're facing any type of a climate crisis, which is why they keep moving the goalpost. I call it the cult of environmentalism, because it's another one of these things that they keep garnering power for themselves. They've actually extracted trillions of dollars of wealth from the economy. It's kind of like the never-ending war, the never-ending climate war, is they change what the climate crisis is. So when I was growing up, it was all about
I feel like there is some effects.
Well, pollution is pollution. There's definitely pollution, but in terms of the actual impacts on the planet, and there's a book that I can recommend to you, it's a very easy read, called Inconvenient Facts, which was obviously to be funny and make fun of Inconvenient Truth, which was a documentary that we were kind of propagandized in school, and we were all made to watch. And they told us that it was global warming was the catastrophe, and the earth was warming. And you don't hear them ever talk about that anymore, because the earth started cooling down in the middle of this propaganda effort. And they told us that all the polar bears were going to be dead. And they don't talk about that anymore, because actually the polar bear population has gone up since then. And factually speaking, the incidences of hurricanes are going down. The incidences of tsunamis are going down. The incidences of tornadoes are going down. And factually speaking, like the earth warming and cooling, has happened since before we ever had tech. Forget big cities. It's been happening since forever. There was the little ice age, that happened, followed by a medieval warm period, which happened. And because people don't know this, they assume that it's our impact on the planet that's causing what's really just climate change. Pollution's an entirely different thing, but what they don't account for is human behavior, which is to say that people are moving into cities because they want to, right? We're not running out of space on the planet, far from it. 93% of America hasn't even been developed yet. But people don't live in the middle of Wyoming, in the middle of nowhere. They want to live in New York City. So then they show you this picture of New York City, which is buildings on top of each other and it's super close together, but people are choosing to live that way. It's not because they're running out of space. It's because people have realized that it's more convenient to live somewhere where you can quickly get to a hospital, where you can make more money, and they're deciding to kind of all live mushed together. So when you actually look at the planet, we've got plenty of space for people, right? But people are living together. So there's a lot of things in the environmental lobby which has done nothing. Every climate disaster that they've predicted since they created the IPCC, which is one of these big government agencies where we give all these trillions of dollars to create things that don't happen, never happened. The ozone layer, global warming, global cooling was in the 70s. They also had acidic oceans. None of it ever came true. They keep getting their climate models wrong, and then they shift gears, and then they tell the people that it's a new generation of why you need to be scared. That's not to say there's a difference between... I read on Vice
that little crabs in the ocean in California losing their shell because it's
shouldn't read Vice.
Eroded by acid, but since then I haven't gone in the ocean in California.
Right.
I'm just like,
they're just telling you what's happening. There isn't
But
actually a climate crisis. There's climate alarmism that literally is creating trillions of dollars for the infrastructure. I mean, the Paris Accord agreement, thinking that somehow if you give them the government more money, it's going to solve the climate crisis, but they keep changing the climate crisis, and nobody goes, wait a minute, but you were wrong, but you were wrong, but you're wrong, and now they've now just say climate change, and there's no model that shows you.
To me, I feel like there is an element of the Earth naturally heating up and cooling down. My dad always talked about it, saying that that's normal. That
totally normal. We go
the chart goes like that, and that like for example, when you see islands that's in a straight line, like in the Maldives, you've got islands that go in a straight line, or near Andaman Islands in the coast of India, there's ones that are in a straight line, and my dad said that's almost like a wound or a scar where the earth opens up and releases hot, and then closes back, and that's how you get things in a straight line. And I always thought, there's some element of truth to that. It felt like that makes sense, that the earth is also hot from the inside, and that now and again it needs to release that pressure, and you've got volcanoes.
Always happened, but now people have realized you can fundraise off of any fear.
But I think, now that we're living through the times of weather modification, which is a normal military thing, and, I feel like maybe, especially something like Ukraine, where use of satellites is such an important part of warfare, then it makes sense that there would be the use of cloud cover, or you know what I mean? Like you would develop something like that in order to stop data and intel being taken on, on a aerial view of a war zone or whatever,
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Well, it's just that when Sri Lanka, the end of the war, during the end of the war, when all of the media was blacked out from the Sri Lankan the strip of beach, the only intel you got was from the UN's camera, from the satellite, and they released these pictures. They didn't release it, they just had the pictures from the satellites of the beach, and it was all bombed. And there was, the whole thing was, the no-fire zone had been bombed. And that fact and that photograph was not released to the public. So I was left being told I'm a terrorist and sympathizer and that I was crazy. Meanwhile, they had this evidence. And then only a year later, it was released by WikiLeaks. And they released the photographs of the UN aerial photos of the no-fire zone, and which is why I became the supporter of WikiLeaks, because they were the first ones to release those photos.
To show you just how corrupt your government is and what they're willing to cover up. And
so
Julian Assange suffered for that.
So having an aerial documentation of a war zone has been a part of the way we operate in a war. And I think nowadays, with more satellites in space, and more connectivity and more internet and 5G and all of these things, it's even more important to have weather being one of the systems that's used, you know. So I feel like that adds to also the pollution or whatever, you know, that's, or the uncertainty of
what's real,
the future of weather, you know. The future, if we manipulate it now, also this is a conversation you're not allowed to have, but it's a completely relevant conversation to have right now, because the implications and the effects of this thing in 20 years down the line, there will be consequences. It's not like there wouldn't be. 100%, just like if you build 50 million buildings in a city and a city is called a city and then 50 million people move to it, the repercussions and the consequences of that 25 years down the line to the water system and the plumbing and the irrigation and the amount of electricity this place uses, all of these are connected. So if you're going to mess with the weather system and the cycle of things, and there's consequences down the line, we also have to have that conversation today.
Right.
You know? And this is why the dangerous thing about the woke culture and the left culture is that they shut down communities that can possibly be smart enough to have those conversations, but they're being used up to have like stupider conversations and then shut down and kept busy. Mm-hmm. But we need those kids now over here. You know, we don't want them over there. You know, like they can throw the mashed potato on the Monet.
We have a buyer.
We have a buyer. They can do that, but then they need to enter the larger discussion, you know, and not make that a viral video and then it's done. And then you go with the big sort of narrative of there is climate crisis, we need more companies, we need more buildings that houses more people and more employees to do this job, which has now got $250 billion funding from Biden, you know, to do. So each one of those jobs is going to drain more resources to do. And you're going to do it all without ever having this conversation, you know? And so it's just like the mechanism of the way the world is built, you know, is just carrying on. And you have to dismantle the infrastructure of institutions, but also the way they're set up, you know?
Well,
and
I think that in having these conversations is actually how you dismantle the infrastructure. I think it's people that have had the audacity to stand up to cancel culture, to challenge the narrative, to say that they believe in Jesus Christ, that they believe in something other than the state. It's why I think they try to keep us separated, why they don't want these conversations to happen, because just the potential of this discussion, how many people are asleep that might wake up and say, wow, I never realized that. And the media will try to rush and they'll try to jump on it and they'll try to say this was crazy and this was crazy and they engaged in anti-vax, this, that, you know, and all of that because they don't want the masses to be awake. But I do think we're winning. And I want to ask you as a final question, what do you hope people get from this conversation?
Well, this is what I wanted to say, is that I think the lesson, first of all, to talk about Jesus Christ, is that what it teaches you is you don't need a lot, you know. And I believe in organic matter. Like, I believe that humans can stay in the form that they are in, you know, built the way they're built, with the minds they have and the way the system works as a human being, that is tapped into the concept of God, you know. Whether you go through Jesus Christ or you go through whichever God you choose, that path is achievable in the form you're in. There doesn't need to be a great level of modification, modernization, and transformation that's needed, you know, for that existence. And that existence shouldn't be seen as an outdated existence, because modernization for the sake of modernization is also got us to this place of great confusion and depletion of resources. And now that we have to create a vaccine to curb population growth in order to survive as human species, or we have to go to Mars. You know, this is not these two options, both these options that we have in front of us right now in 2022, is either you get so rich that you could buy yourself a ticket to Mars, you know, or you become a cyborg, you know, and learn to live in a polluted society, you know, or you curb the population growth, you know, and back the agenda and go for it. So this is three things on the table, you know, and I think the thing to get from it is, like I said, I believe in the core of what a human being is, you know, in their natural state, being able to connect to God. And I think we shouldn't get rid of those values or see them as inferior, you know, and a dated concept.
Couldn't agree more. I think that is the perfect place to end. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you M.I.A in her actual form and not in whatever it is that the media is trying to interpret for you. I hope you enjoyed this conversation on Taboo.